Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, Shabbat shalom, וברוכים הבאים לערוץ הקטן שלי היום. Today, brothers and sisters, I want to start out by answering a question that a few people have posed to me who aren't so familiar or proficient with modern Hebrew. They ask me, what in the world are you saying at the beginning of your videos? So, of course, you understand when I say shalom, 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 but I also say, vruchim habaim la'arutz hakatan sheli. So, bruchim habaim, welcome, or literally, blessed are the ones who are coming, la'arutz hakatan sheli, to my small channel, And speaking of small channels, you can actually help me out. I would love nothing better than to be able to pop up into the feeds. Of course, the algorithm pushed feeds, so more people in our community can actually see me and possibly be blessed. Maybe want to fight. I said blessed, turning into Elmer Fudd here. Can possibly be blessed. Or might want to push back or whatever. But I would like to be in the eyes or maybe in the ears of more people in my community. So if you are a regular subscriber to my channel and in the past you have enjoyed some of the videos, the material that you've seen, I want to ask you to go back and actually like those videos and help with the thumbs up to get me in to the feed. And then also with respect to this video, as well, please consider liking, sharing, and if you're new, subscribing. So let's move forward. I want to do something a little bit different today. It's not grotesquely different, but I am going to talk about a root, a root, not so much cognates necessarily, but a root word, a shoresh. Okay, a shoresh is a Hebrew word which means root, and by and large, most Hebrew words have a three-letter root. Some of the older, maybe now defunct words can have as little as two letters, which comprise the root of the word. But also, moving forward from here, going forward, I want to introduce some roots and also some cultural did-you-knows, and some historical background that might color the picture very well for you. So I want to start out with this. It's not a trick, but I want to ask you, before I go to the root, what do you think you're hearing here? Is this Hebrew? Is it Arabic? Or is it Aramaic? Listen closely. יתגדל ויתקדש שמי רבה בעלמא דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון ויומכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעלם ולעל מעלמיה, יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתעלן שמי דקושה בריחו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דאמירן בעלמה ואמרו Amen. Lots of ch's there, a few ayns and a hets, but that was actually Aramaic, and it employs the same letters, So it's no wonder why, when, let's just say, outsiders got a hold of the sacred writings, and they only had a rudimentary understanding of biblical languages, when they saw these letters, they automatically assumed that it was Hebrew. If you didn't know, Aramaic and Hebrew can both be written with the same letters. There's the Estrangelo script, which is more modern, and Aramaic can also be written with the Syriac script and even with Arabic script. But it would explain a lot of the goofs and the boo-boos or the misconceptions. But I must digress. if I have you interested, if I have you hooked. I'll come back to that. Don't worry. So, the root that we're talking about today here is Gimel, Vet, and Resh. Gimel, Vet, and Resh. Gavar, Gavar, Gabar, Gavar, Gabar. For some, Javar, Javar. Okay. Is it familiar? Does it sound familiar? Well, it should. I think you should recognize it. Okay, there is the uh, archangel Gabriel. 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 Yes. And there's also the word lehit gaber. Lehit gaber. Lehit gaber, which means to overcome. To overcome. Lehit gaber. And Gabriel, as I mentioned before. Um, Don't worry, there's a little wrinkle coming here. It's like, oh, David, I know this already. Okay, so if you consider the word giver, giver, hopefully I won't tear down the setup here before I can get done. Hope you don't mind I'm using modern script because I can write it a lot faster. Giver. So giver is the word for also a man in the modern Hebrew. It's a word for a man, giver. Gever, sicha gever, excuse me, sir, or man. Okay? Gabar means to overcome. It means to be mighty. It means to be powerful or strong or to succeed or to exceed. Okay? To succeed or exceed. We also see that from that same root, if we want to write the name of the archangel, we can just add on to the root gimel vet resh, right? And if we wanted to cancellate it, Gabriel, Gabriel, my might or my power is El. My might or my power. It becomes personal with the E sound on here. Gever, Gavri, Gever, Gavri. Gever, might, power, Gavri. My power is who? El, the one and only Most High, Yehovah, Yud-He, Vav-He, Hashem. Okay, and then also I mentioned to you Lehit Gaber, to overcome. Of course, I'll put the root back at the end again, or at the end this time, but I want to be able to show you the prefix in front, lehit, and I'll put that in green, if I can get it in the right place here. Okay. So, lehit, and the vet gets a dagish, but lehit gaber, lamed, hey, yod, tiny yod up there, sorry about that. Tav, and then the root gaber, lehit gaber, means to overcome. To overcome, okay? To overcome by way of power and or strength. But I know that was so exciting, right? Seeing that root and seeing a couple of words, right? Okay, Gever is a man. Gabriel is the archangel. Lehit gaber means to overcome. But what about the cultural boo-boos and the missteps that I mentioned at the beginning of the video? There's no way that I can say this without ruffling feathers and or getting in some form of trouble. So let the ruffling begin. I've been noticing within our community and on the fringes of our community, these conversations going back and forth with people from the group called UA, or Urban Apologists. And that group, I don't know any of them, but much like a lot of the greater Christian world, our brothers and sisters in the greater Christian world are what I like to call Greek drunk. They're Greek drunk. There is a supersessionist spirit that goes along with not only their theology, okay, but also their treatment of everything as a whole, okay? Supersessionist from the standpoint of my faith is latest, therefore it's greatest. My book, the New Testament, is latest, therefore it's greatest. It's almost like abrogation in the with respect to the Islamic world. Whatever was written later trumps. Sorry for the word Trump. Trumps the whatever was written first. Okay. And I want to use our root example in order to point that out. Now, there are plenty of these things that you know of that are considered mysteries or goofs or whatever in the world that's going on in the New Testament, because everyone pushes and pushes for a Greek New Testament period. I don't have an issue with that with respect to the letters and epistles, but I take great issue, okay, as a would-be scholar of biblical Hebrew. I've been reading the biblical Hebrew scriptures my whole life, virtually from the time before I was 10 years old. I had the building blocks in place and I was reading it, the Hebrew scriptures, in my early teens. I'm also very familiar with the other Semitic languages, chiefly Aramaic, and also the modern spoken Arabic today, which is nothing more than polished up Aramaic of old, okay? And one of the greatest gifts that anyone ever gave to me was a Hebrew New Testament. A Hebrew New Testament, one of the greatest gifts anyone had ever given to me. Because having been exposed to the Tanakh, the greater part of my life, in reading it proficiently, once I got my hands on the Hebrew New Testament, I really had a holy cow, moment, okay? I'll give you the example so I won't belabor this. A lot of people in the community are aware of things like, for example, a good eye and a bad eye being an Aramaic idiom. It's not a Hebrew idiom, but an Aramaic idiom. A lot of you are also aware of how silly it is, a camel going through the eye of a needle. It makes no sense. Even tour guides in the modern state of Israel adjusted some of their tours and came up with some of the most ridiculous things in order to force that false thought process, or that false viewpoint of what was being said. Here's the point for saying this. I pointed out in the prayer that you heard earlier, the Kaddish, the Yitgadal v'Yitkadash. This Kaddish prayer is a very old prayer, and it's something it's so lofty, okay? It's so lofty. Here, I don't want to disrespect the prayer because I realize I just read it to you and I didn't tell you much about it. But Yitgadal v'Yitkadash Shemei Rabbah, may your name be magnified and sanctified, okay, forever. In the world that you have created, may your name be magnified and sanctified. Sounds familiar, almost sounds like the Lord's Prayer, right? Avinu shebashamayim yitkadesh shimcha, or in Aramaic, it's Abun de Bashmaya, Nitkada Shishmoch, may your name be sanctified first. I have to leave that alone. I'll come back and talk to you on another day about the Lord's Prayer in Aramaic in its original form. The point being is that there are accounts that said that the Gospels were written originally in Hebrew. But in a lot of cases, these guys with a rudimentary, a very basic understanding of biblical languages saw these letters and immediately said, oh, it's Hebrew. It's Hebrew. But it wasn't. It was Aramaic. This is why we have the issue of Gamal, camel, versus Jemel, a mooring rope. A mooring rope. A camel, a big old lumpy chewing camel going through the eye of a sewing needle, or a mooring rope. A mooring rope. How do you make a mooring? How could you possibly make a mooring rope as a whole or in part go through the eye of a needle? Well, if you untwine it down to the strings, take off some of the fat, get rid of some of the things that slow you down, like your riches and cares of this world and X, Y, and Z, and whittle yourself down to a string, then you can go through the eye of a needle. Okay? A guy sees Gimel, the letter Gimel, Mem, and Lamed without any vowels, and he says, oh, Gamal, it's a camel. No. So it brings me to the point today with another example that you may not know about. Okay? There is tarnigol in Hebrew, and then there's tarnagla in Aramaic. Both mean a rooster. A rooster. Properly the animal. Properly and specifically the cock-a-doodle-doo, kukuriku, the agitating animal that wakes you up, especially if they're senile and crazy and they're crowing all times of the night. Okay? Tarnigol in Hebrew, tarnagla. How do we recognize the difference between Hebrew and Arabic in Aramaic, if we hear it read, but we don't necessarily see it? Aramaic is a heavily feminine-driven language, okay? And it ends in a lot of ahs, the ah sound, and a lot of the words end with an aleph. They end with an aleph. For example, like Av is father. That's Hebrew. That's Aleph, and Vet. Abba is Aramaic. Aleph, Vet, Aleph. Abba is Aramaic. It's softer. It means daddy. It's like a daddy. It's a term of endearment. M is mother. M. Aleph, Mem Sofit. M. Ima. Aleph. Okay, Mem and Aleph is mother. Abba, Ima. So you'll hear a lot of ahs and ahs, and if you physically see what's written, you'll see there are a lot of alephs and nun sofits. Okay, that's just a clue, a free tip for you there. But here, let's get to the heart. Matthew chapter 26. Matthew chapter 26, verse number 34. Yeshua the Mashiach makes a statement to a very full of zeal, Shimon Kefa. Shimon Kefa, or Simon, or Peter. Kimon Shefa. And he tells him, before the cock crows, you're going to deny me 3 times. He says, I'll die with you. Right? We know how that works out. But the question is, and there are a lot of these questions, okay, with respect to the Gospels. Imagine the people who were being dogged out by occupiers, by their Roman occupiers. And their hope is in the Messianic writings, and they're awaiting Mashiach. They're waiting for that one person to come, chiefly to overthrow their enemies. So they get the good news of this, and they write it down in the Hellenistic language of their oppressors. It's ridiculous, and it's a non-starter, okay? It was turned internal, right? Internal. It would only make sense to write this down in the tongue of the everyday man, in the lingua franca of the day, in the first century, which was not Hebrew, but it was Aramaic. They had not too long come off of captivity, and they left speaking Hebrew, and they came back speaking Aramaic. Okay? These are just the facts. Okay, so if we pick this up, okay, my aim is a 25-minute video here. I have 5 minutes and some change, so I better stop rambling. So if we pick this up in Matthew chapter 26, verse number 34, here's what Yeshua says to the full of zeal Shimon Kefa, the guy who walked on the water, for a hot second. Here's what he said. Amar lo Yeshua, and Yeshua said to him, Amen omer ani lecha, truly, or amen, I tell you, or I'm saying to you, ki balayla hazeh, on this very night, beterem yikra hatarnegol, before the call or the cry out of the rooster. Is it a rooster? He says, Shalosh pe'amim titkachesh li. Shalosh pe'amim titkachesh li. You will deny me 3 times before the tarnegol cries out. Now, curiously, the word yikra, kof resh aleph, means to call out. Call out, okay? It's also can be a word like, for example, the name of the book Leviticus, Vayikra, and he called, the he being the Most High. At that hour of the night, why would a rooster be crowing? That's one question. Second question, in the compound of the temple, with all of the activity, Roman fortress not very far away, and all of the movement, there's a rooster in that compound. What's it doing there? Doesn't make any sense. We'll pick up in just a second at verse 69 of the same, is it verse 69? Yes, verse 69 of the same chapter, and we'll see what's going to happen. But I want to point your attention to this. Here's where we take it home, you guys. Again, I'm not offering anything concrete. I'm giving you something to think about. Gimel, Vet, Resh. Gimel, Vet, Resh. Okay? Now, in Aramaic, or in Hebrew rather, Gavar, as we talked about, is a man. A man. Gever, it can be a man. Gavar, Gever. Okay? He's a mighty one. He's a strong one. If we want to go paleo with this, Gimel, the letter Gimel means foot or support or either recompense or repay. So the one who supports, the one who recompenses or repays in the house, Bet, which is a house, Bait, and then Resh is the head or the apex. So the one who supports, the one who recompenses and repays, okay, over the house, and he's the head of that, okay, Gavar. Now, you might not have known, and I'm going to add an aleph at the end. You may not have known that Aramaic also has a brother-sister word to Gavar, and it's Gabra. Gabra. It means man, but guess what it also means? It means rooster, like the animal. Even though it has, Hebrew has tarnegol and Aramaic has tarnagla, Gabra is a name for a man, but yet it's also a slang for a rooster. Why is this significant? Why is it significant? Okay, the aleph on the end, you can see, as I told you before, Aramaic words can be clearly distinguished by an aleph at the end with an ah sound. Gabra. Why is this significant? Well, I'll tell you why it's significant. Because I've already given you the questions. What in the world would a rooster be doing in the temple complex in the dead of the night with all of this activity and soldiers running and clanking through and all of the excitement and the fires lit? Why would a rooster be there, and then why would it be crowing in the dead of the night? Well, let's look at verse 69 of that same chapter. In closing, I'm not lying. I said next video I want to say in closing one time and not be telling you a fib. Here's where Akifa, okay, mitchakesh Yeshua. This is where he denies Yeshua. Okay, so I don't want to read this whole thing, But you know the backdrop. He's warming himself by the fire, right? And somebody says, hey, I know you. You know that guy. You're with the guy. He says, no, I don't know the cat, right? He moves. He goes to another place. Let's pick it up here in verse number, let's go verse 73. Le'achar sha'a, okay, in the next hour, okay, kila nigshu me'omdim sham ve'amru el kefa. Some people from a person standing from in the crowd came in and they said to him, be'emet gamata mehem. Truly, you are from among those guys. Ki hamifta shelcha megale lecha. Because your accent gives you away. Mifta, your accent gives you away. He spoke with a Galilean Aramaic accent. There was no such thing as a Galilean Hebrew accent, especially when Hebrew was not the spoken language, plain and simple. I might be preaching to the choir, but forgive me for that. Okay? And in verse 74, it says, Az hechel kalal, and then he began to curse. Did Shimon Kefa? He began to curse, and here's what he said. And he began to say, She'enenu makir et ha'ish. And as soon as he said, Enenu makir et ha'ish, I don't know the man, immediately it said, the rooster crowed. The rooster crowed. And then immediately, closing out, in verse 25, it says, Niskar Kefa, b'davar she'amar lo Yeshua. Then Kefa remembered that which Yeshua had said to him, that b'terem yikareh tarnegol shalosh pe'amim titchachesh li. And he went outside, uvacha bechi mar, and he cried and he wept bitterly. Okay, so here's how we wrap this up in the last 2.5 minutes. There is, or was in the Hebrew culture when the temple stood, a man who would go up to the highest part of the pinnacle of the temple. And guess what he was called? Gabra. Gabra. He was called the Gabra, which is a man, but it's also slang for a rooster. Why? Because he would call out. He would call out to the effect of priests. And he would say this in Aramaic. I'm not going to bore you with all that jibber jabber. Priests, come and be ready to sacrifice. That's the first thing he would call out, right? The Aramaic word for sacrifice being dabacha, dabacha. He would say, priests, come out for the sacrifice, okay? And then he would say, Levites, to your stations, to your stations. He's calling to wake them up for the next shift in the dead of the night. Are you starting to see this? All right, he's calling to wake them up for the next shift. So he would say, dabacha, come out for, he would say, priests, get ready for the sacrifices. Levites, go to your stations. You got guys that chopped wood, carried water, kept the fires lit, and the whole thing. And then he would finally call out, Israelites, come to worship. Come to worship. What does this mean? So let's say, for example, that Yeshua, if you read, again, in the Aramaic Peshita, or the Aramaic versions of the New Testament, which a lot of people in the scholarly world, right or wrong, believe that the text was written in, if you can read the Hebrew New Testament, you can see the play on words and the things that happen. Even in the very text that I offered to you, you can see the play on words and the way that things just unfold. But let's just say for a second that they were talking about the Gabra, because in the original Peshita, or in the Aramaic text, it uses the word Gabra, and not Ish, but it uses the word Gabra. So let's just say that when Shimon Kefa slammed his hand down, so angry at that last person, and he said in Aramaic, Dela Yadaya, Anale Le Gabra. Dela Yadaya, Anale Gabra. I do not know the man. And as soon as he got the word Gabra, out of his mouth, the Gabra cried out, priests, prepare for your sacrifice for the Dabacha. Levites, to your stations. Israelites, come to worship. What does that say? Why does he go outside and weep and cry bitterly? If he hears cock-a-doodle-doo, okay. You're so scared for your life at that moment. If cock-a-doodle-doo comes, you might not even pay any attention because you're trying to escape the moment. But if the silence is broken by the voice of a man standing at the pinnacle of the temple and screaming this out, what is that saying to Simon Peter? What it's saying is this. The sacrifices were getting ready to take place for Pesach, getting ready to take place. Preparations were getting in place for that. They had been beating Yeshua all night long, ripping the hair out of his beard, spitting in his face, putting purple clothing on him and mocking him, crowning him with a scepter, hitting him in the head and hitting him in the face, cursing him, and saying and doing all these things to him. And the pain was just getting ready to start. The pain was just getting ready to start for him. So as the animals for that time period were being prepared to be sacrificed, they had just tuned him up all night and the pain had not even started. So guess what? Shimon, there's a couple of ways to look at this. For Shimon, Kefa, for Peter, not only would you not die with him, you didn't have it in you, and it wasn't expected of you. But the real pain hadn't even started. And 3 times you said that you did not know him. In the Hebrew version of the New Testament, it says, Enenu makir et ha'ish. I'm not familiar with the man. But in the Aramaic, it says, Dela yadaya, anale legavre. He says, I don't know Yodea. Yadaya, I know you recognize Yodea, Hebrew, Yadaya, Aramaic. In an intimate way, I don't know him like that. I'm not even familiar with him, he says in the Hebrew version. What does that say for the goofs that are made with respect to loss of meaning or not recognizing a word like gemel, but you think it's gamal, a camel as opposed to a mooring rope, or gabra instead of gavar? What does it say? What does it say? It means that we have to be careful with what we become dogmatic about. We have to be very careful. I'm the first one to give that to myself. Have to be very careful about what we become dogmatic about. You know, after around the year 130 of the Common Era, you know, a little less than 100 years after the death, burial, and resurrection of Mashiach, when all of the ethnics had been driven out, killed, or exiled, others took over the faith. And they recreated it in a lot of ways in their image. Okay? Imperfectly, it's, translated. You lose in translation with every language. Okay? But this is why some people live by the KJV and they die by the KJV in a lot of ways. Hopefully not spiritually, it won't happen. In the rooms that, or in the platforms that I've viewed over the last couple of days, where you have people arrogantly reading scriptures like, Christ is the end of the law for righteousness, okay? They don't care that the Greek word there is telos. It means the goal or the aim of the law. They don't care. They have the KJV, and that's all that matters. The King JJ, and it's all that matters. They don't want to look below the surface. They don't want to look below the surface. What else? Segad. Segad. Segad is the Aramaic word for worship. Segad. Okay, we have avodah in Hebrew, which means service or work. Okay, don't be triggered. It means service or work. But segad means worship in Aramaic. But here, I'm not beating Greek up completely. I'll give Greek a little bit, just a little bit of credit. But you see that all of these other languages are inferior when it comes to the language of the target people, to the Israelites in Hebrew. You have the Greek word proskuneo, which is translated to worship. It comes from a two-part word. Pros, which means toward. Okay. Kineo is a kiss. So in the Greek culture, to worship is to throw a kiss at whoever you're worshiping or whatever you're worshiping. You want to say yikes, I get it. But the word segad in Aramaic, Greek actually gets it close. I would say a tad closer than Hebrew. Why? Because the word segad is borrowed from old Middle Egyptian, and it means an air kiss, an air kiss. And if you put the history and the culture along together with it, you've seen it. Some idols are so worn out from people touching them that they prohibit people from touching them, or sometimes they're at such a distance from the people that they can't physically touch them. So they throw an air kiss out. All right, ever seen a grandchild or a son or a toddler, infant, whatever, blow an air kiss to someone? Now, I'm not saying nothing's wrong with that. In the modern context, you don't know anything about that, but it'll make you think about things a little bit differently. Throwing an air kiss or blowing an air kiss. So proskuneo means blowing an air kiss, but segad in Aramaic, that's about the closest thing. All right, but it goes to show you when you get to Hebrew, and I'm sorry, I just realized that I had a brain fart there. I said that the Aramaic was closer than Hebrew. No, it's not. Hebrew is superior. Okay, the filter down languages apply pagan meanings. In Hebrew, avodah is the word for worship, but it literally means service and or work. Avodah, la'avod, eved, or eved is a servant. Avodah means to work. La'avod in the infinitive, to work. Okay? So worship is service. It's what you do for the one that you claim that you love. Okay? So, again, I hope that image is in your mind. And I hope these words will give you something to think about. Shimon Kefa denying him 3 times, and the pain, the real pain, had not even started yet. Not only would you not die with him, you couldn't even be in the same room with him. You couldn't stand in his shoes. You couldn't even endure the pregame, my man, before the main event got ready to start. Why? Because the work of Mashiach Yeshua is dark as it was for him, for as lonely as it was for him, for as painful as it was for him. It was something that only he could do, and he couldn't let anybody get in the way in front of him or in between him of his work once he set his face toward fulfilling his mission. And it was something that only he could do. Only he could do. And it was dark. It was bloody. It was unfair. To think that someone would pay a debt that's not his. And in the words of the prophet Yeshayahu in Perek Nun Gimel in 53, it says, Velo yiftah piv, velo yiftah piv, and he did not open his mouth. Like a sheep led to the slaughter. Legozezea velo yiftah piv, and he did not open his mouth. Okay, Shabbat Shalom, everybody, and I hope this has been a blessing for you in some type of way. May the Most High watch over you, keep you, make his face shine upon you, and be gracious to you. May he lift his countenance upon you and give you his shalom. See you soon.